Good evening, fellow night owls. As we go through life, we make changes to aspects of our personality based off the things that we see and do. Maybe you're running a little late on the train and you run into the love of your life, or you find a new passion by taking a class at a community college. What was that moment for me, you ask? That one. And I still have PTSD nightmares about it to this day. My first home console was a PlayStation 1 that my brother and I got for Christmas, and then after that, my brother upgraded to the PlayStation 2. That means that in my first couple years of home console gaming, I subsisted on a thin stew of platformers, action adventures, World War II shooters, arcade racers, and 4 kinds of Final Fantasies. I went mad trying to replicate the experience of the PlayStation on my Xbox Series X, but I think I may have found a way to do it. Follow me. Nah, just kidding, I'll do it here. Recently, Microsoft has not been shy about pushing its former Xbox exclusives onto other console suitors. We've already seen a few of these games go to Nintendo and Sony, so I honestly don't expect this trend to turn around. For one, the taste of most gaming consumers has definitely changed. Games like Fortnite and Among Us have changed what we think about as a successful game, and those games are multi-platform, so kids can play them on whatever console they happen to have. In the heat of the console wars, it was important to have console exclusives because you had to give people a reason to buy your thing. And it's because the other guy sucked. But Sony has always prioritized internal development on both its hardware and its software front. And sometimes that's worked out for Sony. I mean, they backed the DVD player with the PlayStation 2, and that knocked that console into the stratosphere. But systems like the PS Vita are severely hampered by having excruciatingly expensive memory cards, and I could see why people just didn't want to jump onto this type of pricing. But whatever your stance on porting games is, it will always be extra work. And software preservation generally has 2 components: migration and emulation. Now, migrating is just about making the files accessible and usable. How to use those files varies person by person.
They're in the computer?
For some, that may mean just making the game available and not changing anything about it. Trying to mimic the exact same feeling that you had when you played the game when the game released. For others, however, that means that they'd like to have the game dusted off, have new textures, and maybe update controls. One of the games that I played for this video, Star Wars Bounty Hunter, honestly doesn't have too many upgrades to its name. It actually continues the story of a comic which outlines the beginnings of Jango Fett, who was heavily featured in Episode 2. The game was released digitally on the PlayStation 4 online store, but then received a more thorough redo in 2024. It also received a physical numbered release from Limited Run Games. Now, this game isn't a huge upgrade visually. It doesn't look too bad and has some textures polished, but there are a few cutscenes that just don't make it look like they care as much as they should have. For example, when you use the grappling hook to capture bounties that you claim, it looks like Spider-Man trying to take aim on the deck of the Titanic, and I don't remember it being that bad. There are also a few odd details in cutscenes, and the camera looks like they just gave up on halfway through. But they did make an effort to modernize the controls to make it a little bit easier. This game is very long, so I'm not complaining, but having updated controls makes this game much more bearable. And now that you can play it on the Switch, Xbox, or PC, you're not restricted to the console purist vision of playing with this console and this disc with this controller. I don't know where this came from. Attentive night owls might have seen that I care deeply about having an authentic controller experience. If I'm reaching back, especially to play a game system with a very specific controller, if I can, I like to have a suitable alternative that helps replicate that experience. But all these games play great on an original Xbox controller as well, and I'm sure they play great on the Switch. I just haven't gotten a chance to try them there. The 8bitdo Pro 2 Xbox Edition is a wired controller with a symmetrical stick layout. And this helps to kind of emulate how the original PlayStation controller felt, even if it's not necessarily my first pick in general. The Pro 2 is solidly built, has good weight to it, and fits nicely in my hands. I also really like the fact that you can detach the USB cable at both ends, because you could just use any USB-C cable and this will totally work. I have a few gripes with the PlayStation controller, besides the thumbstick just not being in the optimal position for me. I have a PlayStation 3 controller that just doesn't turn on at all unless it stays plugged into my PS3, which is a shame because I'm tethered to be super close to the console, and that may not be suitable for my living room. The controller feels solid and has a nice weight to it. It feels better than PlayStation controllers do in my memory, and has some nice stippling around the edge, and as well as 2 extra buttons on the inside. This controller ran me about $30, but if you want a more premium experience, my buddy Little Rob actually recommended the PDP Vectrix controllers. These Pro controllers come in PlayStation and Xbox flavors, and they allow you to switch the location of the buttons and the thumbsticks, so you could have the PlayStation or Xbox grip and have the thumbstick in the location of your choosing. I'm actually really happy with this product at $30. This is a very solid controller for the price, and I even have a few more games coming soon that I'm really excited to play with this controller in mind.
The winner is 17!
I win! This is it, baby. First thing tomorrow, we're getting a PlayStation 1.
No matter which symmetrical stick controller you choose, there's some latent and inherent benefits that we'll go over in a bit. For example, the original Crash Bandicoot released in 1996, and that predates the DualShock controller by a whole year. That means that if you buy an original copy of Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation, the thumbsticks just won't work. When the series was readdressed by Vicarious Visions in the Crash Insane trilogy, they had the opportunity to upgrade the controls to make the game more accessible. Should Vicarious Visions have held strictly to the original and left out the thumbstick controls? I don't necessarily think it's for me to say, but I do think that people wouldn't have been as enthusiastic about this game, and it probably wouldn't have sold that well. With this perspective in mind, it feels like the decision to modernize controls was made by execubots, not hardcore preservation nerds.
80% likely.
It will play in Peoria.
Game shows are back.
Another example of this controller enhancing the gameplay was in the Spyro Reignited trilogy. While Spyro is a 3D platformer, its proximity to the primordial days of the genre mean that standardized controls had yet to be fully formed. While this game was released with thumbsticks in mind, the game was fully playable with the D-pad. The benefits that I see in this game mostly lie in Spyro's minigame. For example, in this minigame in Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, you have to collect gears while riding a minecart. The cart doesn't turn when you tilt the stick left or right, rather it snaps into an adjacent lane. So using the D-pad means that I can press with one click and know that I will slide one lane over. You could use the thumbsticks to complete this minigame, but using the D-pad to ensure that you can shift lanes quickly makes this challenge much more manageable. Of all the games that I tested to make this experience a reality, I think that the game that benefits the least from having a PlayStation-style controller is Ty the Tasmanian Tiger HD. Traversal is exclusive to the thumbstick, so having that input directly under your thumb makes the most sense to me. Ty uses the D-pad to select which boomerangs to use, so I think it would be best tucked out of the way. And even just this discussion about the controller might drive certain collectors up a wall. If you said that Star Wars Bounty Hunter's Xbox re-release is not 100% authentic to the original, you'd be technically correct.
The best kind of correct.
There's no way to emulate this experience to a T, however. I mean, even if you got a PlayStation 2 and a PlayStation 2 controller and a CRT, it still wouldn't be the exact same as when you played the game in 2002. For example, you might have a CRT that has an exceptionally bad picture, and so even if you played the game on an original hardware with the original disc, it wouldn't necessarily replicate the experience that you had when you were a kid. And if you're bringing this up to show your kids, I mean, statistically, your kids have never gamed on a CRT. It would be an unpleasant experience for them. Thinking about the variety of preservation experiences made me start looking into all this in the first place. Many things can influence the way that you play games, such as where you live in the country or how rich your parents were. As somebody who's 30 or 40 years old and doesn't have unlimited money, I'd rather spend $30 on a controller and $30 on an Xbox game rather than spending $500 on a PlayStation 5. PlayStation has also softened its stance on porting its games to PC, so I've been able to catch up to certain games like the God of War duology, the Spider-Man games, and even Helldivers 2 have become some of my favorite games to play on PC. So with all those factors in mind, it colors how I collect and preserve games for my personal collection. So I picked all 4 of these games because I think they all share something in common, and they both have characteristics that would either make it an ideal playing situation for somebody who doesn't have original hardware, but also have a feature that makes some people not want to save it in an emulation housefire. Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, for example, is a game that actually came out on the original Xbox, but in my memory, it was a series that I only ever saw on the PlayStation. For me, playing Ty the Tasmanian Tiger is more authentic on this controller than it would be on an Xbox controller. But that may not be true for someone who's never seen a PlayStation 2. On the other hand, it was the only game in the lineup that has been shepherded largely by the same team. Chrome Studios worked on the original 4 games as well as all of the remakes of Tai, so the improvements to controls and visuals feel like a Ship of Theseus improvement by the same author. Is this the authentic emulation experience? Or what about the Crash and Spyro trilogy? Crash and Spyro are both collections that were rebuilt from the ground up by different studios. Studios that definitely cared about the characters in the source material for sure, but a programmer on the first game could likely spot missing music or physics that don't quite act the same way. I don't think that the average person playing these games would look at the additions as detractors to the experience. The improved textures, shadows, and reflections all help to make these game worlds feel more lived in. Aspire's re-release of Bounty Hunter feels a less full-hearted. Sure, they touched up some of the textures and there's a flashlight now, but Aspire is not necessarily known for being especially careful with their ports. Their recent efforts with the Tomb Raider and Battlefront collections have mixed reviews at best, but this feels like what some would have for many of these games, simply make them replayable. Let me know what your favorite method of emulation is in the comments below. I'm genuinely interested to see what you all have to say, and I like to expand my horizons about what is emulation and what is preservation for people. Let me know in the comments below, fellow Night Owls, and I'll see you tonight.